Hey y'all, and welcome to PolitiBrawl. My name is Brian, and Markwayne Mullin just takes a wrecking ball to Kaitlan Collins on her own show. This really is the best CNN can do. Let's dive in.
What economist that Republicans have heard from has told you this bill will not add to the deficit?
Well, we have the same economists that you're referring to are the same economists that said that the TCJA, the tax cuts that President Trump put in place in 2018, was going to add $1.5 trillion in deficits, right? They were dead wrong. It actually added $1.6 trillion in surplus. So these same economists carry little to no weight when they're talking about the tax provisions, because that's what they're talking about. They're saying that if we do nothing on taxes, that it's better for the economy to allow them to expire and have the average tax for the average household go up $1,400 a month. So how can they say that keeping the current tax policy and making it permanent is going to be bad for the economy? Because that's what they're talking about. They're not talking about the waste and fraud we're cutting out of Medicaid. They're talking about the tax provisions.
Yeah, but there's no economist that anyone has pointed to that has said that it won't add to the deficit unless has someone told you that it will not add at all?
Because we're looking at what's actually happened before. Last time that we had the TCJA passed, we saw the economy respond to it because, one, confidence brought back into the consumer's confidence level. We saw medium household income increase, and we saw investments in the states and the counties that they live in increase also. Therefore, we saw a $1.6 trillion surplus. What we're saying right here is this is easily going to create a GDP of around 3% easily. We already see trillions of dollars of manufacturing jobs coming back. When we are able to have full expense on R&D, we're able to have a confidence that the tax provisions are going to be in place. We know that businesses respond to assurities, and assurities mean that they can depend on our tax code staying in place, and when they do that, they'll invest in our economy.
But part of this is why it's coming due is because the last time when it was initially voted, you weren't in office, I don't believe, when the Trump tax cuts were voted.
I was in the Senate. I was in the House.
Right, you were in the House.
Right.
When they were passed in the Senate, though, they were set to expire. So everyone who passed it knew that this was going to happen at some point where you would have to pass it or people would have an increase.
But those are the same economists that were talking about that it was going to destroy the economy.
Right, what you're talking about
the greatest economy growth during that time that we had seen.
What you're talking about is the Congressional Budget Office. That's who you're citing here, who scored it then. They've scored this now that everyone's
But they're referring
disputing.
to the same economists to which you're referring to.
Right,
and I'm going to, that economist hasn't came to Congress and talked to us.
But let me ask you on the Congressional Budget Office that all the Republicans are disputing now, or at least the ones who are for this bill, because in a headline in December 23rd, 2021, you actually wrote this in the Bartlesville Examiner Enterprise in Oklahoma, and you said, according to the Congressional Budget Office, the Build Back Broke bill, which is President Biden's legislation, will cost $4.9 trillion and add over $3 trillion to our nation's debt. Some people may look at that and say, well, why were the numbers trustworthy then if they're not trustworthy now?
Because we're comparing, by the way, we're absolutely correct on that. But what we're looking at.
But you liked their numbers then, but you don't like them now.
Sure, but
some people might think that's
because the way they score, let's just talk about the way they score, right? And I just want to break some stuff down, so I'm going to get a little wonky on you right here. Right now, student loans are at only a 50% payback. So we have $1.6 trillion, and I want to use this as an example. $1.6 trillion in student loans are out, 41,000 total loans. Only 50% are current, 30% are deferred, 20% are in default. Now, what the CBO is saying, because we changed that to where they have, and instead of being able to borrow unlimited amount, we've capped it to $50,000, or the House capped it at $50,000 per student. The CBO is saying that's a cost, because they concern that we're not going to be able to collect the interest, because the way the CBO scored this as a cost is that they assume that we're going to collect 100% of it and the interest going into it. CBO also got it dead wrong in 2017, as I've stated before just a while ago.
But was it dead wrong? It was a little off, but it wasn't totally dead wrong.
It was totally off because they said it was going to be a $1.5 trillion deficit. And instead, by 2019, or 2020, we had a $1.6 trillion surplus.
Pandemic. Those things were factored into what happened by 2020.
No, 2020 wasn't in there. I'm saying in 2020, not after we had COVID hit. When the 2020 numbers came out for 2019 came out in 2020, We had a $1.6 trillion surplus. Now, how wrong was it?
Folks, one of the worst kept secrets in all of Washington, D.C. is the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, is great at compiling data and studying data, but they are terrible at projections. Okay? In order to understand this sort of projective look, the best way to actually describe it is trying to project fantasy football numbers. And instead of looking at traditional players that get injured a lot or wind up just not ever being able to live up to their full potential, there's certain players that might have the height, the weight, the speed, but they don't have the hands to catch the football. The Congressional Budget Office is in that weird ballpark where they're not able to project properly because they don't understand what actually makes a good football player. They do understand, on the other hand, based on the weight of evidence that has come in. They are good at compiling the data, not projecting the data. That's why the Congressional Budget Office exists, and it's why they're not stockbrokers. Okay? You don't judge them by their winners, you judge them by their losers. Hey, y'all. Here's the deal. Gold loves President Trump. Under Trump's first term, the price of gold soared 53%. And the price of silver jumped 51%. Since the start of the second term, gold has skyrocketed even higher, breaking records and even outperforming stocks. Here's what I like about precious metals like gold and silver. They have been used as a store of value for centuries. Governments can't easily manipulate it. They are used as hedges against market risk and, of course, against inflation. That's why I partnered with the amazing people over at Goldco. Goldco is an award-winning precious metals company. They are fans of this show, and they have helped millions of Americans just like y'all to purchase over $3 billion in gold and silver. Right now, you can get a free copy of their 2025 gold and silver kit. On top of that, you might also qualify for their amazing unlimited silver bonus offer. So don't wait on this. Go to PolitiBrawlGold.com to learn more. That's PolitiBrawlGold.com or call 855-644-GOLD. And then there's another great truth in DC that even Democrats have had to admit at this point, is that tax cuts actually work. Because when you cut those taxes, when you cut rates by a couple of percentage points, you actually open up the amount of capital that can be invested, that can now move around. And then what happens after about the span of a year is that the economy ends up growing. This has happened under Reagan. It happened under W. And as a matter of fact, let's keep going with this. Yeah, Reagan, W. Obama kept the Bush tax cuts. Donald Trump then took Paul Ryan aside and said, hey, write me the first version of the big, beautiful bill. And it spurred the economy to new heights that we had never seen. And only in 2 occasions in the past about 50 years have we seen that tax cuts actually increase and then makes everything worse. Under H.W. Bush, under the very old traditional Northeast Republicans, he was the last of that last group of Republicans, and it didn't work. It worked so poorly that it got us Bill Clinton, although I personally blame Ross Perot, but that's a much larger deep dive. Then, under Obama, even he had to admit that the Bush tax cuts were working. The only other time was under Joe Biden, when the Democrats only had the House and Senate for about 2 years before people started realizing, oh, we might not want to be electing these guys. And in that 2 years, they let the Trump tax cuts essentially expire. They didn't reform it, they didn't change it, but the American people then felt the pinch of what happens when you let taxes go up to its X level, and that X level was making sure that that capital was not flowing. We felt the pinch the hard way, and now Trump is trying to pass this sort of stuff again. So Kaitlan Collins can constantly go back and forth saying, well, you like the CBO then? Well, congrats, the CBO was good at compiling the data and understanding what happened, they're not good at projecting what's going forward. Meanwhile, there's a new truth in the Senate, by the way. Tom Cotton, whenever he speaks, you might want to listen. When John Kennedy is speaking, you want to tune in because you know you're going to get a Southernism and you're also going to get a lesson at the same time. That's the kind of teacher you actually want in high school, by the way. But when Markwayne Mullin speaks, you know you're going to get a brief lesson on logistics, because this dude has actually run a business. He knows what is actually going into the federal government. He knows what is coming out as an output, and he understands those basic logistics that most politicians can't fully grasp, because we get, as much as I love saying that you want to elect a lawyer to the Senate, you want to elect a doctor to the Senate, when it comes to the House of Representatives, you typically get a more hodgepodge of the American people, and particularly you will get a swath of business owners. But on the Democrat side, you get a lot of doctors, you get a lot of lobbyists, you get a lot of lawyers. Again, good ideas on their face, but these people understand niche portions of either the economy or of our law, and they don't have a full understanding of budgets because they don't have to run a business. Lawyers can charge whatever they want to charge, and while there is some economics to that, where you charge too much for one thing and you're just going to see a drop off in revenue, or you charge too little and you see no actual revenue because your clients are, full of it. What you ultimately get is when you have someone who worked as a small business owner, you get someone who can actually look at the books, lick their finger, turn the page and go, okay, here's the problem with your numbers here, and here's where we want to be. That's the reason why Republicans tend to be better at governing than it comes to Democrats. That's the simple truth of the matter. Forget the actual policies. Forget the lunacy that comes out of the DNC. The reality is, when you boil it down, Republicans understand logistics and Democrats just don't. That's the reason why I constantly say here that Democrats can't govern. And finally, you get Kaitlan Collins trying her best to put Markwayne Mullin between a rock and a hard place, and that's not going to work because Republicans have spent so long under the gun of the mainstream media. And as a matter of fact, I can pinpoint as far back as Miracle on 34th Street. I'm talking about the original black and white version, by the way. Ever since I was a kid, this one line has stuck out to me. When the judge is about to exit the courtroom, when he's listening to the advice of a friend of his who later played Fred in I Love Lucy, he looks behind him as he's about to open the door and says the district attorney is a Republican. That's said with some derogatory undertones, and that's been a mainstream theme in Hollywood ever since the 1930s. Republicans now understand how to navigate this media landscape, and Kaitlan Collins has no good answer for it because, well, she's Kaitlan Collins and it's CNN. So Markwayne Mullin hits a home run here because he actually understands basic logistics, and the Democrats, they simply don't. Folks, my name is Brian. Hope you enjoyed that segment here on PolitiBrawl. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Catch you on the next one. Until then, y'all have a good one.